When a wealthy black CEO takes a quiet walk near Harvard, he's shocked to find his brilliant 19-year-old niece shivering, filthy, and homeless. Just months ago, she had a full scholarship. Now she's sleeping on concrete. As she chokes back tears, he learns the unthinkable. After her mother died, her white father took all the money and then threw her out, snarling that a blackie could never be his daughter. He stole her identity, her future, her dignity, and no one, not Harvard, not her uncle, knew. But that ends now, because this girl's uncle has power, and what he does next. It doesn't just fight back. It destroys everything her father thought he could control and shows the world exactly what happens when you try to erase a child who was born to rise. Marcus Powell's fingers tightened around his Italian leather briefcase as he walked through Harvard Square. The February wind whipped between the brick buildings, carrying snowflakes that stung his cheeks. He'd left his driver and security detail at the hotel, needing these few moments alone before next week's big announcement. His wool coat, worth more than most people's monthly salary, did little to shield him from the Boston winter. But the cold wasn't what made him stop dead in his tracks. There, huddled against the red brick wall of a coffee shop, was a small figure wrapped in a thin jacket. A worn backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. The hood slipped back just enough to reveal a familiar face, one he'd last seen smiling in graduation photos less than a year ago. "Michelle?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. The girl's head snapped up, eyes wide with recognition and shame. "Uncle Marcus!" His niece, his beloved sister's only child. The brilliant student who'd earned a full ride to Harvard, now trembling on the streets of Cambridge. Marcus dropped to one knee, ignoring the slush soaking into his designer pants. Up close, he could see how thin she'd become, her cheekbones sharp beneath her dark skin. But her eyes, Janet's eyes, still held that same fierce intelligence he remembered. "Are you hurt?" He was already unwinding his cashmere scarf, draping it around her shoulders. His leather gloves followed. "How long have you been out?" "Here." Michelle tried to push the scarf away. "I'm fine, Uncle Marcus. Please, you don't have to—" That's when he saw it. A faded crimson lanyard hanging from her coat pocket, the Harvard H barely visible after months of wear. "Why aren't you at Harvard like you're supposed to be?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "What happened to your scholarship?" She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't have a home." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He stood slowly, extending his hand. Michelle hesitated before taking it, her fingers ice-cold against his palm. Without a word, he guided her into the warm diner across the street. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The waitress took one look at Michelle's trembling form and immediately led them to a corner booth away from the windows. "Hot soup," Marcus ordered, "and tea. The biggest cup you have." Michelle sat with her backpack still clutched to her chest, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. The diner's fluorescent lights highlighted the exhaustion on her face, the way her collarbones jutted out above her shirt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, staring at the scratched Formica table. "I never wanted you to see me like this." "Don't!" Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't apologize. Just tell me what happened." The waitress returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea. Michelle wrapped her hands around hers, but they were shaking so badly that the liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Marcus watched his niece, the girl who'd given the valedictorian speech at her high school graduation, who'd earned a perfect score on her SATs, who'd made Janet so proud, try to stop trembling long enough to lift the mug to her lips. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table with quiet determination. "We're making calls tonight. You're not disappearing on me." There was steel in his voice, the same tone that had built his company from nothing, that had closed billion-dollar deals. But underneath was something softer, the echo of a promise he'd made to Janet years ago to always look out for her little girl. Michelle's hands stilled around her mug as she met his eyes, and for just a moment, he saw a flicker of hope break through the exhaustion. The soup arrived, steam rising from the bowl, and Marcus watched as Michelle forced herself to eat slowly, though he could see how hungry she was. His mind was already racing, making plans, but first he needed to understand. He needed to know how his brilliant niece had ended up here, and why he hadn't known sooner. He'd failed Janet once by being too busy to see her struggles. He wouldn't fail her daughter, too. Even in the warmth of the diner, Sarah couldn't stop shivering. Her uncle Marcus watched her wrap both hands around the steaming cup of tea, her thin fingers seeking comfort in its heat. The spoon clinked softly against the bowl as she stirred the untouched soup. "Take your time," Marcus said quietly. "Just start from the beginning." Sarah drew a shaky breath. "Mom got sick so fast. The doctors said it was aggressive cancer, and within 3 months..." Her voice cracked. "After the funeral, everything changed. Dad, it was like a switch flipped." Marcus leaned forward. His normally commanding presence softened with concern. "What do you mean, changed?" "He started saying things, terrible things." Sarah's eyes fixed on the swirling soup. "About Mom, about me, how I wasn't really his daughter, how he'd only tolerated having a black wife and mixed child because he loved her, but now..." A tear splashed into her tea. "He took everything," she continued. "My laptop, my birth certificate, all my documents, said they weren't mine to keep anymore. One night he threw some clothes in a suitcase and told me to get out. Said he wasn't supporting any..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus's hands tightened on the edge of the table, his knuckles white with controlled anger. "And Harvard, without an address, without my papers. I missed deadlines, financial aid forms, housing contracts." Sarah's voice grew smaller. "They put my scholarship on hold. I tried explaining, but everything needs documentation I don't have." Marcus stood abruptly. "Excuse me for a moment." His voice was carefully measured as he stepped outside the diner, phone already in hand. In the cold evening air, he dialed his Harvard contact, Dr. Chen. "James, I need your help. It's about Sarah Williams, my niece. She lost her scholarship status." "Ah, yes, unfortunate situation." Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the speaker. "But if she can provide updated documentation, stable housing verification, and file an appeal, reinstatement is possible. The committee would be sympathetic, given her previous academic excellence." "Thank you." Marcus ended the call and dialed another number, bracing himself. Robert Williams answered on the third ring. "What do you want?" "I'm with Sarah. She needs her documentation. Birth certificate, social security card, academic records." A harsh laugh. "Not happening. That ungrateful." "Robert, think carefully about your next words." "Or what? Try anything, and I'll tell everyone how you're manipulating a vulnerable girl away from her grieving father. How's that for your company's image?" The line went dead. Marcus counted to 10, then texted his lawyer. "Need emergency meeting tomorrow. Family matter." Back inside, Sarah had managed a few spoonfuls of soup. Her shoulders were still hunched, but some color had returned to her cheeks. "Listen carefully," Marcus said, sliding back into the booth. "Harvard hasn't forgotten you. There's a path back. We just need to rebuild some paperwork and get you stable first." Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes, then dimmed. "But Dad..." "Let me handle your father." Marcus pulled out his phone again. "Right now, we're getting you somewhere safe for the night. I know a church with an emergency shelter program. Good people." As he spoke with the shelter coordinator, Marcus watched his niece carefully. Even exhausted and afraid, she held herself with the same quiet dignity his sister had always shown. The thought tightened his chest. After arrangements were made, Marcus helped Sarah gather her worn backpack. She swayed slightly as she stood, and he steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly, leading her toward his car. The evening had grown colder, and he wrapped his scarf more securely around her neck. "First we get you warm, then we fight smart." The church basement door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air, before Mrs. Helen Wilson quickly shut it behind them. The space below was warm and bright, filled with neat shelves of canned goods and folding tables. The smell of beef stew drifted from a slow cooker in the corner. Come in," Mrs. Wilson said, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her weathered hands gently guided the niece forward. "I'm Helen, 20 years running this pantry, and widow to the finest Marine I ever knew." The niece tried to speak, but her teeth were still chattering. Her uncle squeezed her shoulder and nodded to Mrs. Wilson. "Let's get you warmed up first, honey," Mrs. Wilson said. She led them past the shelves to a small but clean bathroom with a shower stall. "Hot water works just fine. Take your time." The niece's fingers fumbled with her backpack straps. "I don't want to be trouble." "Hush now." Mrs. Wilson pressed a fluffy towel and a set of grey sweats into her arms. "Tonight you rest. That's all you need to think about." "I'm sorry," the niece whispered, eyes downcast. "I shouldn't need..." Everyone needs help sometimes, Mrs. Wilson cut in firmly but kindly. The Lord sends us to each other. Now go on. Get warm. While the niece showered, her uncle made calls in the hallway. His voice was low but determined as he arranged for a doctor to check her over. Mrs. Wilson busied herself ladling stew into bowls, adding extra crackers on the side. 20 minutes later, the niece emerged looking slightly less pale, swimming in the borrowed sweats. Her damp hair curled around her face. Dr. Martinez, who ran a nearby clinic, checked her thoroughly, treating patches of chapped skin, checking her temperature and prescribing vitamins. Your blood pressure's a bit low, the doctor said gently. Regular meals and rest will help. I want to see you again in 3 days. The uncle returned from his car with a shopping bag. Some basics for now, he said, pulling out thick socks, winter gloves, and basic toiletries. We'll get more tomorrow. They sat at one of the folding tables, steam rising from bowls of stew. The niece took small, careful bites, as if afraid the food might disappear. The basement was quiet except for the hum of the heating system and the clink of spoons. Can I ask? She started, then stopped. Anything, her uncle said. Why did you come to Cambridge today? Of all days? Harvard partnership meeting next week. Some new scholarship programs. He watched her face carefully. I walked to clear my head before the final planning session. She nodded, stirring her stew. I used to watch the lights in the library at night, from the park bench. Her voice got very small. It helped, somehow. Seeing people studying, knowing learning was still happening even if I couldn't. Her uncle set his spoon down hard. Mrs. Wilson reached across the table and covered the niece's cold hand with her warm one. When I lost my James, Mrs. Wilson said softly, I'd walk by the VA hospital where he used to volunteer, just to feel close to what he loved. There's no shame in holding on to hope. The niece's eyes filled, but she managed a wobbly smile. Tonight we rest, her uncle said firmly. Tomorrow we start fixing things one step at a time. Mrs. Wilson stood, joints creaking slightly. I've made up the spare room upstairs. It's small, but it's warm and private. Been empty since my daughter moved to Chicago. She smiled. Would do my heart good to have someone using it. They climbed the narrow stairs to the church's second floor. The room was indeed small but spotless, with a twin bed, covered in a handmade quilt, a lamp and a nightstand. A cross hung on one wall, and curtains framed a window overlooking the quiet street. Bathrooms down the hall, Mrs. Wilson explained. I'm just across the way if you need anything. Breakfast at 7. The niece nodded, clutching the strap of her backpack like an anchor. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to... You rest, Mrs. Wilson said again, patting her shoulder. That's all. For tonight. Her uncle hugged her carefully as if she might break. I'll be back first thing tomorrow. You're safe here. The niece sank onto the bed, running her fingers over the quilt's neat stitches. For the first time in months, her shoulders began to relax. Outside, in his car, her uncle watched the light go on in her window. It glowed warm against the cold night, like a beacon, like a promise. He sat there for a long time, guarding that light, until it finally clicked off and he knew she was asleep in a real bed, under a real roof, safe at last. The morning sun filtered through the church's kitchen windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden table where Mrs. Peterson, the churchwoman, served steaming bowls of oatmeal drizzled with maple syrup and topped with fresh berries. Eat slowly, dear, Mrs. Peterson said, placing a glass of orange juice beside the niece's bowl. There's plenty more where that came from. The niece's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her spoon. She'd gotten used to wolfing down whatever food she could find when she could find it. Taking small, deliberate bites felt foreign now. Her uncle sat across from her, his own breakfast untouched as he made calls on his phone. I've cleared my schedule, he said, setting the phone down. We're going to Harvard first thing. The financial aid office is expecting us. Mrs. Peterson squeezed the niece's shoulder. You finish every bite, honey. Those Harvard folks can wait 5 more minutes. The drive to campus was quiet. The niece pressed her forehead against the car window, watching familiar buildings pass by, buildings she'd dreamed of studying in before everything fell apart. Her uncle kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes full of worry and determination. The financial aid office was housed in a brick building with ivy climbing its walls. Inside, away from the bustle of campus life, they were led to a private office where Ms. Roberts, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, waited for them. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice," Ms. Roberts said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. "I've reviewed the initial information your uncle sent over, but I'd like to hear from you directly about what happened." The niece took a deep breath. "After my mom died," her voice caught, but she pushed forward. "My father got control of everything. The accounts, the paperwork, all of it. She twisted her hands in her lap. "He changed, or maybe showed who he really was. He said terrible things about my mom, about me, said I wasn't really his daughter." Her uncle's hand found hers, steady and warm. "He took my laptop, my documents, everything. That proved who I was. Threw me out with just a suitcase." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I tried to keep up with school, I really did, but without an address, without access to the right forms." Ms. Roberts nodded, her expression compassionate but professional. "I understand. And I want you to know that your situation isn't unique. We have protocols for students facing housing insecurity." She opened a folder on her desk. "Your academic record is exceptional. That hasn't changed. Reinstatement is absolutely possible, but we need to do this properly to protect you long term." The niece sat up straighter. "What do you need?" "First, a formal appeal letter explaining the circumstances. Second, proof of stable housing. This protects both you and the university. Third, we'll need replacement identification documents. And finally, we need records related to your mother's estate, particularly regarding the intended educational support." The CEO leaned forward. "I can cover any financial requirements immediately. Whatever it takes." Ms. Roberts held up a hand. "Your support is wonderful, but documentation matters more than money right now. This isn't just about getting her back in class. It's about ensuring she has legal protection going forward." They spent the next hour going through requirements, marking deadlines on a calendar. Ms. Roberts scheduled a follow-up call for Thursday afternoon, after the emergency hearing the CEO's lawyer was filing. In the hallway outside, the niece's shoulders slumped. Her voice was barely audible when she whispered, "I'm scared to hope." Her uncle turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Then I'll hold the hope until you can." They drove directly to her mother's old apartment building. The niece hadn't been back since the funeral. The familiar red brick and black iron railings made her heart ache. The building's landlord, Mr. Chen, met them in the lobby. "I wondered when someone would come," he said, pulling out his keys. "Your mother was a good tenant, always kind to everyone." As they climbed the stairs, Mr. Chen explained that he'd kept some things that had been returned to sender. "Didn't feel right to throw them away," he said. At the apartment door, he reached behind his desk and pulled out a dusty cardboard box. The niece recognized her mother's neat handwriting on several envelopes inside, letters that had never reached their destination. The musty apartment felt like stepping into a time capsule. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, casting thin stripes across boxes stacked against bare walls. The niece sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by unopened envelopes that should have reached her months ago. Her fingers trembled as she slid open the first letter. The familiar curve of her mother's handwriting made her throat tight. "Dear James," she read aloud, her uncle's name like a weight. "I need you to check on us. Things aren't right here anymore." The CEO, James, knelt beside her, his usual composed expression cracking as he took in his sister's words. Letter after letter painted a picture of growing isolation, of a husband whose grief had twisted into something darker, of a mother trying to protect her daughter. "She knew," the niece whispered. "She saw what he was becoming and tried to warn you." James closed his eyes, his shoulders heavy. "I should have visited more. Should have noticed when the calls stopped." He picked up another envelope, dated just 2 months before his sister's death. "I thought she was busy. That things were fine because that's what he always said on the phone." They worked methodically through the apartment, checking every drawer and shelf. In the back of the master bedroom closet, behind a stack of old photo albums, the niece found a slim manila folder with her name written in her mother's careful script. Inside was a bank receipt from First Boston Trust, a small silver key attached with a paperclip, and a single sheet of paper. The note was brief but clear. "If he turns on her, this is the way back." The date showed her mother had written it just weeks before she died. The niece pressed her palm flat against the paper, as if she could feel her mother's presence through the ink. "I thought," her voice caught, "when you didn't come looking for me, I thought you'd chosen your company over family. That maybe you believed what he said about me." The CEO set down the stack of letters he'd been holding. In the quiet apartment, his sister's absence felt like another presence in the room. "I failed you both," he said simply. "I won't make excuses for that, but I promise you this. I will earn back your trust through actions, not just words." The niece nodded, carefully folding the note and tucking it into her pocket with the key. "Mom knew this might happen. She left breadcrumbs for us to follow." They gathered everything into a cardboard box. The letters, the folder, old photos that might help prove timelines. The apartment felt different now, less like a tomb and more like a message in a bottle, waiting to be found. The churchwoman had lunch waiting when they returned, thick sandwiches and hot tea. She didn't ask questions, just squeezed the niece's shoulder and said, "Eat first, worry second." While they ate, James called the estate attorney his lawyer had recommended. The EU receptionist's voice was crisp and professional over the speakerphone. "We can see you first thing tomorrow morning, 7:30. Bring all documentation you've located, especially anything with dates or signatures." The niece gripped her tea mug tighter, the ceramic warm against her cold fingers. Tomorrow felt both too far away and too soon. "We'll be there," James confirmed. He ended the call and looked at his niece across the kitchen table. The churchwoman had left them alone, understanding their need for quiet. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. The niece touched her pocket where her mother's note rested. "She believed I would need these things someday. She trusted you would help me when that time came." She met her uncle's gaze. I think it's time to trust her judgment." The morning sun cast long shadows through the estate attorney's office windows as Marcus Bennett, CEO of Bennett Enterprises, sat beside his niece Tara. Law books lined rich mahogany shelves, their spines straight and dignified. The attorney, Mrs. Rodriguez, adjusted her reading glasses as she examined the documents spread across her desk. "Your mother was incredibly thorough," Mrs. Rodriguez said, lifting a yellowed paper. "She established an education trust specifically for you, Tara. The terms are crystal clear. The funds were meant solely for your schooling and basic needs." Tara's fingers twisted in her lap. "But your father challenged the trust's terms immediately after your mother's passing," Mrs. Rodriguez confirmed, her tone gentle but firm. "He managed to gain temporary control by arguing he needed oversight of your education choices." Marcus leaned forward, his usual calm demeanor cracking slightly. "And no one questioned this?" "Without anyone contesting it at the time." Mrs. Rodriguez spread her hands. "But now we have grounds to challenge his authority, especially given recent events." They headed to First Boston Bank next, where Tara clutched the small key they'd found in her mother's papers. The bank manager, a thin man named Mr. Peters, examined their documentation with pursed lips. "I apologize, but we need both keys to access this safety deposit box," he explained. "The second key is tied to estate paperwork that must be presented by the current executor, your father." Marcus watched his niece's shoulders slump. He placed a steady hand on her back. "Then we'll get that authority changed." Back in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, she worked quickly, drafting emergency motions while explaining each step. "We're filing for immediate protection of remaining funds and demanding release of Tara's personal documents. I've secured a hearing for tomorrow morning at 8:30. "That fast?" Tara whispered. "When we can show immediate harm and risk, yes. The court takes these matters seriously." Mrs. Rodriguez handed them copies of the filing. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we start fighting back properly." The afternoon light was soft in the churchwoman's kitchen. Mrs. Thompson set out mugs of tea and homemade cookies, while Tara sat at the worn wooden table, pen hovering over paper. "Just write from your heart," Marcus encouraged. "Harvard needs to understand what really happened." Tara took a deep breath and began writing. Her words flowed steadily, describing the sudden loss of her home, her documents seized, and how she refused to let go of her dreams. She wrote about studying under library lights, borrowing notes from sympathetic classmates, and trying to keep up with coursework even while searching for safe places to sleep. Mrs. Thompson wiped her eyes as she read the finished letter. "That's the truth they need to hear, child." She sat down to write her own letter, confirming that Tara now had a permanent room in her home, complete with utilities and meals. Marcus's assistant arrived with a thick envelope of certified documents, death certificates, appointment letters, bank statements showing suspicious transfers. They spread everything across the table, organizing papers into clear plastic sleeves. Each document tells part of the story, Marcus explained, helping Tara arrange them in chronological order. Together, they show a pattern the court needs to see. Mrs. Thompson brought them sandwiches as they worked, insisting they eat properly. "You need strength for tomorrow," she said firmly, patting Tara's thin shoulder. By early evening, they had assembled a proper court folder, clean, organized and professional. Marcus checked his phone, confirming their morning appointment. 8:30 sharp, he said. "The courthouse opens at 7:45. We'll be there early." Tara stared at the folder that held her future. "I never thought I'd have to fight like this." "You're not fighting alone anymore," Marcus promised. He helped her set her alarm for 6 a.m., then gathered his things to head home and prepare for morning. Mrs. Thompson pulled out clean towels for Tara's shower. "A good night's sleep is part of being ready," she insisted. "The Lord didn't give us rest time for nothing." As Marcus drove home through the darkening streets, he thought about his sister, her wisdom in preparing protection for her daughter, her love reaching beyond death to help make things right. Tomorrow would be the first step toward justice, and he intended to see it through. At the Veterans Outreach Center, hummed with warmth and conversation, as the niece Sarah tied a clean apron around her waist. Steam rose from metal trays filled with hot stew and fresh bread. Her hands had stopped shaking for the first time in days. "Coffee, Miss Sarah?" called out Mr. Rodriguez, a gray-haired veteran who came every Wednesday. His weathered face creased into a smile. "Coming right up," she said, grateful for the simple task. The ceramic mug felt solid in her hands as she carefully filled it. "Still taking it black? You remembered." He patted the seat next to him. "Take a break when you can. You look like you could use someone to talk to." From across the room, her uncle watched as she moved between tables, refilling drinks and listening to snippets of life stories. The CEO had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, helping serve alongside her. He noticed how naturally she connected with people, asking about their families, remembering details from conversations, treating each person with quiet dignity. Mrs. Chen, the center director, touched his arm. "Your niece has been here almost every evening for months. Even when she had nowhere to sleep, she made time to serve others." "I didn't know," he said softly. "I should have known. She never complained, just worked hard and treated everyone like they mattered." Mrs. Chen pulled out a sheet of letterhead. "I'm writing a character reference for tomorrow. The court should know what kind of person she is." After the dinner rush, Sarah sat with Mr. Rodriguez and a few other regulars. They shared stories of hard times, sleeping in cars, missing meals, fighting to rebuild. An older woman named Gloria reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Baby girl, listen to me," Gloria said, her voice firm but kind. "Don't let anyone convince you you're less. I see how you treat people here, with respect, no matter what. That's who you are. Don't let anyone steal that truth from you." Sarah blinked back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that night, in the churchwoman's warm kitchen, Sarah's uncle spread out papers on the wooden table. The lawyer had sent detailed instructions for morning court. "We'll arrive by 8, he explained. "The demand. Notice will be handed to your father's lawyer before the hearing starts. Stay calm, answer only what's asked, and remember, you're not alone in that room." Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. What if he says terrible things? What if he makes people believe I deserved what happened?" The churchwoman set down 3 mugs of chamomile tea. "Truth has its own power, child. It doesn't need fancy words or loud voices." "She's right," her uncle said. "We have evidence of the letters, the trust paperwork, witness statements from Harvard and the Outreach Center. But most importantly, we have your character. That speaks louder than any threat he could make." They reviewed their morning timeline again. Sarah would wear a borrowed blazer from the churchwoman. Her uncle's driver would take them to avoid parking stress. The lawyer would meet them at the courthouse steps. "Try to sleep," her uncle urged as the kitchen clock crept toward midnight. "Tomorrow is just one step. Whatever happens, we keep moving forward." Sarah nodded and gathered her Harvard appeal letter, pages filled with honest words about determination and hope. In the small guest room, she placed it carefully beside her bed. Her uncle remained at the kitchen table, reading his sister's letters by lamplight. Each one held pieces of warning, of love, of protection, planned but interrupted. He traced his sister's handwriting with his finger as if touch could bridge the gap between then and now. "I hear you now," he whispered to the pages. "I'm listening." The churchwoman quietly refilled his tea. "She's stronger than she knows," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed. "But tomorrow she won't have to be strong alone." Outside, a gentle snow began to fall, coating Cambridge in silence. Inside, warmth held against the cold, and people who had become family kept watch over a young woman's dream of justice. Dawn painted the sky in cold winter colors as their car pulled up to the father's house. The CEO glanced at his niece in the back seat, noting how she sat perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap like armor. The lawyer beside her reviewed documents one final time, his briefcase open and ready. The house stood pristine, a colonial with crisp white trim and carefully maintained shrubs. Even the welcome mat looked freshly vacuumed. The CEO remembered visiting here when his sister was alive, how she'd always met them outside with warm hugs and laughter. "You don't have to come to the door," he told his niece softly. "I do," she whispered. "Mom would want me to face him standing up." They walked up the brick path together, their footsteps crunching on salt-scattered ice. The lawyer hung back, slightly phone-ready to record. The CEO pressed the doorbell, its chime echoing inside. Heavy footsteps approached. The door opened to reveal a man in an expensive sweater and pressed slacks, his silver hair perfectly combed. For just a moment, his practiced smile held. Then his gaze found the niece and his face hardened into marble. "This is harassment," he said flatly. "I told you not to come here." The CEO kept his voice steady, professional. "We're here for Sarah's documents, her laptop, identification papers, and the estate records Harvard needs. Simple and quick. Then we leave." "There's nothing here for her." The father's polite mask cracked further, ugliness seeping through. "Your sister was foolish enough to marry outside her race. I won't compound that mistake by enabling her half-breed daughter's delusions of—" "Don't you dare speak about Mom that way," the niece cut in. Her voice shook but didn't break. "She loved you, she believed in you, and you threw away everything she built for me because you couldn't stand what I look like." The father's laugh was bitter coffee. "Built for you? She built nothing. I earned everything in this house. Your mother was an accessory, and you're an unfortunate reminder of my worst decision." The lawyer stepped forward, speaking clearly. "Sir, we're officially requesting the return of Sarah's personal property and documentation. Your refusal to provide these items will be noted in today's hearing." "Hearing?" The father's face flushed. "You really want to play this game? I'll bury you all. I have friends at the paper, at the alumni office, one phone call about the unstable scholarship student and her manipulative uncle." "Go ahead," the CEO said quietly. "Explain to everyone why a Harvard freshman is sleeping on streets while her father lives in luxury. Tell them how you intercepted her mother's letters. Show them exactly who you are." The niece stepped closer, her chin lifted. "I only want what my mom meant for me, my education. That's all I'm asking for." The father's hand tightened on the doorframe until his knuckles went white. "I'll make you pay for this. All of you. You have no idea what I can do to your reputation, your business, partnerships." The lawyer's phone captured every word. The CEO simply nodded. "You can cooperate now, or you can explain yourself to a judge in 1 hour. Your choice." "Get off my property!" The father slammed the door so hard the wreath bounced. They walked back to the car in silence. The niece's hands were trembling, but her spine remained straight. The lawyer reviewed the recording, confirming every threat was clear. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. Snow started falling in tiny flakes that melted on the windshield. The CEO watched his niece in the rearview mirror. She stared out the window, absently touching the faded Harvard lanyard she still kept. They found parking near the courthouse steps. Before they got out, the CEO turned to face his niece fully. "You did good back there. You stood your ground with grace, just like your mother would have." She managed a wobbly smile. "I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared," he said. "It means doing what's right anyway." The lawyer distributed copies of their filing documents, the churchwoman's housing letter, the Veterans Center reference, Sarah's intercepted letters, the bank receipt and key, the Harvard appeal draft, everything that proved their case, piece by piece. In the parking lot, they straightened coats and checked watches. The CEO squeezed his niece's hand gently. "Head up, we're walking into truth." The courthouse loomed before them, all granite and columns. They climbed the steps together as scattered snowflakes swirled around them. The security guard checked their bags and waved them through. The clock on the wall read 8:25 as they stepped through the heavy wooden doors, ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and coffee. At precisely 8:30, Judge Marion Reynolds entered, her silver hair pulled back severely, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. The CEO noticed his niece sit straighter, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Emergency motion regarding estate documentation and personal property," Judge Reynolds stated, scanning the filing. "Let's be efficient. Counsel?" The estate attorney rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we have evidence that vital documents were intentionally withheld from Sarah Williams, directly impacting her Harvard enrollment and housing stability." He approached with the manila envelope of unopened letters. These were returned to the mother's apartment, never forwarded to the daughter. Inside we found this note written by the deceased mother, expressing concern about potential financial manipulation. The judge examined the letters, her expression unchanging. "And the immediate emergency basis? Ms. Williams has a pending Harvard appeal deadline. Without these documents, she loses her chance at reinstatement. Additionally, her laptop contains required academic records the father refuses to release." The father's attorney interjected, "Your Honor, my client has every right to manage family property as he sees fit. A 19-year-old's personal identification documents and academic records are not family property," Judge Reynolds cut in sharply. She turned to the father directly. "Sir, do you have your stepdaughter's laptop and paperwork in your possession? That computer was purchased with family funds. Yes or no, sir?" The father's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And her birth certificate, social security card, student ID? Those items are in my home office." Judge Reynolds removed her glasses. "Then here's what's going to happen. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order on all disputed estate funds pending full review. You will immediately release Ms. Williams's personal documents and computer. Officer Martinez will accompany them to retrieve these items within the hour," she continued before anyone could object. "Full hearing is set for next Thursday at 9 a.m. I expect complete financial records and estate documentation. And let me be crystal clear, any retaliation or interference with Ms. Williams's academic appeal will be considered contempt of court." The father's face flushed dark red, but his attorney touched his arm in warning. "Any questions?" Judge Reynolds asked. The room stayed silent. "Dismissed." Officer Martinez, a steady-eyed woman in her 40s, drove behind them to the father's house. The winter morning had turned bright and sharp, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow. The father answered the door in the same sweater, his composure cracking when he saw the officer's badge. "Court order for immediate release of documents," Officer Martinez stated calmly. "Shall we proceed?" Inside, the father's performance continued, shuffling papers, claiming items were misplaced, until Officer Martinez said quietly, "Sir, delaying tactics will be noted in my report." The niece's laptop appeared from a desk drawer. Her birth certificate and social security card from a filing cabinet, student ID and transcript copies from a shelf. "The original estate paperwork," Officer Martinez prompted. More shuffling produced certified copies of the mother's will and trust documents. The father's hands shook with suppressed rage as he handed them over. "Is that everything, Ms. Williams?" Officer Martinez asked. The niece nodded, clutching her laptop like a lifeline. They walked out under clear sky, leaving the father seething in his doorway. Back at the churchwoman's home, they gathered around the kitchen table. The niece opened her laptop with trembling fingers. The screen lit up, revealing folders of carefully organized essays, applications, and scholarship materials. "He didn't erase them," she whispered. "They're all here." The CEO squeezed her shoulder gently. "Let's get these to Harvard before the offices close." They worked steadily through the afternoon, scanning documents, attaching the court order, drafting a clear timeline. The churchwoman kept them fortified with tea and soup. At 4:45, the niece took a deep breath and clicked send on the appeal email. They watched the loading circle spin. "Message delivered," the screen confirmed. The niece logged into her Harvard portal, hands shaking so badly she mistyped her password twice. She navigated to the appeals section. There it was. Appeal received. Under review. She stared at those words, tears spilling suddenly down her cheeks. The CEO pulled her into a tight hug as she sobbed, not from sadness this time, but from the pure relief of being heard, of having proof she existed, of seeing her path home start to clear. The churchwoman quietly set out fresh mugs of tea, her own eyes suspiciously bright. They sat together as winter sunset painted the kitchen windows pink and gold, marking the end of a day when truth had finally begun to speak louder than lies. The screen's blue glow lit up the churchwoman's kitchen as the niece scrolled through her phone. Her hand trembled, and the coffee in her mug went cold and untouched. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. The post had appeared less than an hour ago, carefully worded accusations painting her as unstable, ungrateful, a burden on society. Comments piled up beneath it, each one a fresh cut. "I ruin everything I touch." Tears splashed onto the phone screen. "Harvard will see this. Everyone will see this." The churchwoman, who had been quietly washing dishes, dried her hands and crossed the room. Without a word, she gently took the phone from the niece's grip. "We don't swallow cruelty to prove we're strong, child." She set the phone face down on a high shelf. "That's not what strength looks like." The CEO paced near the window, his own phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand the concern," he said to Harvard's liaison. "We have the court order from this morning. The full hearing is next Thursday." He listened, his expression tight but controlled. "We can provide all documentation by then. Yes, I appreciate your patience in this matter." After ending the call, he stepped into the hallway to speak with his communications director. They crafted a statement that stuck to verifiable facts: the court order, the scheduled hearing, the documented withholding of essential papers. No accusations, no emotional language, just clean, clear truth. "We don't fight mud with mud," he explained when he returned to the kitchen. "We fight it with light." The Veterans Center director called next. "I just saw that garbage online," she said, her voice crackling, through the speaker. "I've posted about how she serves our vets every week. Never missed a shift, always gentle with our most troubled folks. I'll testify to it in court if needed." The niece looked up, eyes red but steadier. "They believe in me. They know you," the churchwoman corrected, setting fresh tea in front of her. "That's stronger than believing." The estate attorney's call brought better news. The court order meant they could access the safe deposit box tomorrow morning, as long as they brought proper identification and both keys. 9 a.m., she confirmed. "Don't be late." At the kitchen table, the CEO helped his niece outline simple talking points for Harvard. Dates, documents, court orders. No defensive language, no desperate explanations. "Remember," he said, touching her hand, "you don't have to prove your worth to anyone. Worth isn't something other people give you permission to have. Just present the facts and let truth do its work." The niece nodded, her shoulders straightening slightly. "Like Mom would. Exactly like your mother would." The CEO smiled, though his eyes held old grief. "Speaking of whom, we should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow morning we open what she left for you." The churchwoman brought blankets and extra pillows, creating a warm nest in the spare room. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows, but inside the house held steady, a fortress of simple kindness against the storm of public cruelty. Before the niece headed upstairs, she paused. "What if there are more posts tomorrow? Then we'll face those too," the CEO said. "But we'll face them standing up, not hiding. Your mother taught me that." The churchwoman nodded in agreement. Truth doesn't need shouting to be heard. Sometimes it just needs time to echo. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite steps of First Boston Bank as Marcus Bennett guided his niece Sarah through the heavy bronze doors. Their estate attorney, Mrs. Chen, walked beside them, her briefcase containing the court order that had taken them this far. Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched the small key they'd found in her mother's apartment. Her uncle squeezed her shoulder gently. "We're right here with you." The bank manager led them to a private viewing room, wood-paneled and hushed. Sarah watched as he matched their keys and documentation, then pulled the long metal box from its vault. The lock clicked softly. Inside, organized with careful precision, lay a stack of papers bound with a blue ribbon. But it was the small silver flash drive that made Sarah's breath catch, a simple label in her mother's familiar handwriting. "For my daughter." Mrs. Chen reviewed the documents first, her expression brightening. "These are exactly what we needed. Complete trust documentation naming Sarah as sole beneficiary of the education fund. Your mother was very thorough. The bank manager provided a laptop for the flash drive. Sarah's hand shook so badly that Marcus had to help her plug it in. A video file opened, and suddenly Jennifer Bennett's face filled the screen. "My beautiful girl." Her mother's voice was warm and steady, just as Sarah remembered. "If you're watching this, something has gone wrong, but I want you to know first and foremost that you are loved. You have always been loved." Sarah pressed her fingers to her lips, tears spilling silently. On screen, her mother continued with remarkable composure. "I've set aside funds specifically for your education, accounts that can't be touched by anyone else. Mrs. Chen has all the documentation you need. I know your father." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know he's capable of letting anger cloud his judgment, but I refuse to let that steal your future." Jennifer detailed the accounts and legal steps, speaking with the same patient clarity she'd used to help Sarah with homework all those years. But it was her next words that made Sarah's tears flow faster. "Baby, I need you to remember something. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, your dignity isn't something they can take. It lives in how you carry yourself, how you treat others, how you rise above cruelty without becoming cruel. I've watched you grow into such a compassionate young woman. That's your true inheritance, not money, but the strength of your character." Marcus found himself gripping the back of Sarah's chair, his own eyes burning. His sister's voice held no bitterness, no rage, only love and fierce determination to protect her child. The final envelope caught their attention, cream-colored stationery addressed simply to James, Sarah's father. Sarah started to reach for it, but Mrs. Chen gently intercepted. "This should be presented properly through legal channels," she explained. "It's evidence for the hearing." They spent the afternoon in Mrs. Chen's office, carefully scanning and organizing everything for both the Harvard appeal and next Thursday's court date. The trust documents were crystal clear. The education fund was Sarah's alone, and her father had no legal right to block access. Marcus made a quick call to confirm the Harvard partnership event was still on schedule for Thursday evening. "Everything's proceeding as planned," he told Sarah, "one step at a time." By evening, they were back at the churchwoman's house. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks borrowed from the library. Her mother's words seemed to have steadied something in her. There was new purpose in the way she held her pen, new certainty in her posture. Marcus settled into a chair nearby, answering emails on his phone but mostly just keeping watch. The kitchen clock ticked softly. Outside, early spring wind rustled bare branches against window panes. His niece's pencil moved steadily across paper, each scratch a small act of defiance against those who'd tried to silence her dreams. He thought of Jennifer's video message, her grace, her foresight, her unwavering focus on equipping her daughter with both practical tools and spiritual strength. She hadn't just left Sarah money, she'd left her a blueprint for resilience. Sarah paused in her studies to rub her eyes, and Marcus noticed she was holding her mother's old Harvard lanyard like a talisman. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, managing a small smile. "For the first time in a long time, I think I really am." The kitchen settled back into comfortable silence. Marcus watched his niece return to her books, her shoulders straight, her mother's quiet dignity wrapped around her like armor. Sometimes the strongest messages came in the gentlest voices. Jennifer had known that. Now, finally, her daughter could hear her again. The Saturday morning sun filtered through the churchwoman's kitchen windows as the CEO spread paperwork across the wooden table. His niece sat beside him, her fingers tracing the edge of her old student ID, now bent and faded from months on the streets. "One step at a time," he said, checking off items on a fresh legal pad. "ID first, then certified copies, then we build your Harvard timeline backwards from next Thursday." The DMV was crowded, but efficient. The niece held her new ID card like it was made of glass, staring at her own face. Official, real, recorded. "I exist again," she whispered. At the copy center, they made multiple sets of everything. The court order, trust documents, the mother's letters. The CEO watched his niece organize each set with careful precision, her hands steady now where they had once trembled. That evening at the Veterans Center, she poured coffee and served plates with a gentle focus that made the older men smile. One veteran with silver hair patted her hand. "You remind me of my granddaughter. Same quiet strength." Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. The churchwoman's pew creaked as they sat together, hymns washing over them. The niece closed her eyes during prayers. shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. That afternoon, she rewrote her Harvard statement, weaving in what she'd learned about resilience and community. The CEO met privately with key donors, sharing court documents and the mother's protective planning. "This is about justice," he explained, "not drama." Monday brought her first counseling session. The therapist's office was warm with soft chairs and boxes of tissues. "You don't have to be perfect," the counselor said. "You just have to be honest." The library welcomed her back like an old friend. She studied near her favorite window, sunlight touching the pages of borrowed textbooks. The CEO's lawyer worked late into the night, building exhibits around the mother's recorded message, proof of planning and protection. Tuesday filled with more steps forward. The Veterans Center director wrote a glowing letter about her volunteer work. The churchwoman documented stable housing. Harvard's housing office confirmed a room would be held pending Thursday's outcome. "You're doing everything right," the CEO assured her as they reviewed the growing file. Wednesday morning, the Harvard liaison called. "The appeal is compelling," she said carefully. "We just need Thursday's hearing to confirm the legal framework." The niece gripped the phone. "I understand," she replied, professional despite her racing heart. Thursday morning arrived heavy with importance. The courtroom gleamed under fluorescent lights as the judge reviewed everything. The mother's planning, the father's obstruction, the niece's persistence. She ordered immediate compliance and began outlining restitution steps. This court takes seriously both the interference with education and the attempt to undermine a parent's clear wishes, the judge stated, eyeing the father. Further resistance will not be tolerated. That evening, the Harvard Partnership event filled with dignitaries and donors. The CEO's new scholarship program for students facing crisis would help dozens like his niece. When she rose to speak, her voice was soft but clear. "Thank you for believing education matters more than circumstances," she said simply. "Thank you for helping students find their way back." The room erupted in applause. Older donors wiped tears. Veterans stood straight and proud. For one shining moment, everything felt possible. Then came the late-night text. A new smear campaign was spreading online, paired with a legal filing questioning the mother's competency when she created the trust. Donors started calling with concerns. Harvard's liaison left a carefully worded voicemail about pending review of new developments. The niece read the online comments until her vision blurred. Rain fell outside, matching her tears. She stuffed clothes into her backpack, the old survival instinct taking over. She had to disappear before she ruined everything her uncle had built. The bus station's neon signs cut through the downpour as she ran, but suddenly an umbrella appeared above her, and her uncle's hand caught her arm. "Come home," he whispered, his voice breaking through the rain. Rain dripped from their coats as the CEO guided his niece through the churchwoman's back door. Her clothes were soaked from her attempted escape, and her eyes held that haunted look he'd seen on the streets, the instinct to disappear when things got hard. The churchwoman was already waiting with a thick blanket and hot tea. Without a word, she wrapped the blanket around the shivering girl's shoulders and pressed a warm mug into her trembling hands. "I can't keep causing trouble," the niece whispered, staring into her tea. Everyone was so kind at the Harvard event, and now it's all falling apart again. The CEO pulled up a chair beside her. "Running kept you alive on the streets, I understand that, but running won't build your future. It just leaves the bullies in charge." Their lawyer arrived, shaking rain from his umbrella. He set his briefcase on the kitchen table and pulled out the latest documents. "Your father is trying to control the story, make Harvard nervous about controversy, but we have truth and courts on our side." The niece's shoulders slumped. "Maybe if I just disappeared for a while—" "No," the CEO's voice was gentle but firm. "We're going to handle this the right way, not with revenge, but with accountability that protects you forever." They spread papers across the worn kitchen table. The churchwoman kept refilling teacups as they worked, her quiet presence a comfort in the late-night hours. The CEO's pen moved steadily as they drafted. Their response: first, immediate requirements, full release of all remaining records and documents. Second, financial restitution of misused assets with court oversight. Third, and most important, a public acknowledgement of responsibility. "But there's more," the CEO said, looking at his niece. "This isn't just about punishment. It's about changing things." They added restorative requirements, mandatory community service hours, supporting homeless, youth programs and veteran outreach centers. A mediated listening session where the father would really hear, the impact of his actions, but with strict boundaries to protect the niece from manipulation. "We give him a path to do better," the CEO explained, "but we don't give him power over you ever again." The niece traced her finger along the paper's edge. "What if he refuses? Then everything goes through courts and public record," the lawyer said. "But this way we offer dignity alongside consequences." The CEO made one more decision, pulling out a separate form. "I'm establishing a permanent scholarship and emergency housing fund in your mother's name. No student should fall through the cracks like this again." The niece's eyes filled with tears. Mom would have loved that. Near midnight, the estate attorney arrived with a final piece, the sealed letter they'd found in the safe deposit box addressed to the father in the mother's handwriting. Without ceremony, he drove it to the father's house for immediate delivery. In his empty living room, the father broke the seal with shaking hands. His late wife's words spilled across the page, her voice reaching through time to confront the man he'd become. As rain drummed against his windows, he sank into his chair, the letter trembling in his grip as certainty cracked into shame. Back in the churchwoman's kitchen, the niece finally slept on the couch, exhausted but safe. The CEO sat nearby in the dim light, guardian and witness, while justice and mercy took shape in the quiet hours before dawn. The churchwoman touched his shoulder gently. "You're doing right by your sister," she whispered. He nodded, watching his niece's peaceful breathing. "We're not just fixing what broke," he said softly. "We're building something stronger." Outside, the rain eased into a gentle patter, washing the streets clean as Friday morning approached with its own demands and choices. But for now, in this warm kitchen that had become a sanctuary, they had crafted a path forward. One that offered both consequences and hope, both justice and the chance for change. The morning sun cast long shadows across the father's bedroom as he struggled to sit up, his heart racing uncomfortably in his chest. Sleep had been impossible after reading his late wife's letter. Her words haunted him, showing him the truth of what he'd become. His hands trembled as he tried to button his shirt. By 8 o'clock, he found himself in an urgent care clinic, watching a doctor frown at his blood pressure readings. "This is a warning sign," the physician said firmly. "Stress can kill you just as surely as any disease." The sealed letter from his wife felt heavy in his pocket, its edges worn from his constant handling through the night. Her words had stripped away his defenses, leaving him raw and facing the ugly truth of his actions. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known he might turn cruel, and she'd prepared for it with a mother's fierce protection. At 11, he entered the conference room at his lawyer's office. The setup was carefully controlled, a mediator present. His lawyer to one side, the CEO's team on the other. When his daughter entered with the churchwoman, he barely recognized her. Gone was the frightened girl he'd thrown out. In her place stood a young woman with quiet dignity, her spine straight and her eyes clear. "I'm safe now," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not here to be hurt again." The words hit him like physical blows. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain away his actions, but the practiced excuses died in his throat. Looking around the room, he saw something that shattered his remaining illusions. No one feared him anymore. His power to intimidate had vanished in the face of truth and justice. He started, then had to clear his throat. "I let greed poison me. And prejudice. I convinced myself you weren't really mine because—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Shame finally breaking through. The churchwoman kept a steadying hand on his daughter's shoulder as the lawyers presented the documents. His hands shook as he signed each one. Releases for all records, the restitution agreement, and a public acknowledgement of his actions. The words on the page were stark and honest. He had wrongfully withheld his daughter's educational funds, interfered with her Harvard enrollment, and allowed racial prejudice to justify cruelty to his own child. The CEO watched without triumph or gloating. When the last paper was signed, he simply said, "Do the next right thing even when it cost you." The father nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. This wasn't just about money or documents, it was about the ongoing work of making amends. The community service requirement suddenly felt less like punishment and more like a path forward. His daughter stood to leave, and he fought the urge to reach for her. She wasn't his to hold anymore. That right would have to be re-earned if it ever could be. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. The CEO's team worked efficiently, scanning and sending documents to Harvard's administration. Court orders were attached, along with proof of stable housing and the restored financial documentation. Every piece of paper represented another barrier removed, another step toward his daughter's rightful place at Harvard. By early evening, the churchwoman's kitchen had become a waiting room. His daughter sat at the worn table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, while others moved quietly around her. The CEO checked his phone periodically, maintaining his usual calm demeanor despite the stakes. When the email notification finally chimed, the room fell silent. The CEO read it twice before speaking. "Reinstated," he said simply. His daughter stared for a moment, unmoving. Then her hands began to shake, and tears spilled down her cheeks as the relief hit her in waves. The churchwoman wrapped her in a warm embrace, while the CEO stepped outside to make calls, giving his niece privacy in her moment of triumph and release. The father, alone in his big empty house, looked at his phone when the confirmation was forwarded to all parties. He set it down and picked up his late wife's letter again, reading her words of love and warning one more time. For the first time, he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd almost destroyed, and the gravity of the work ahead to make it right. The cherry blossoms dotted Harvard Yard with pink when the niece attended orientation. She sat straight-backed in a wooden chair, hands folded neatly in her lap, drinking in every word about class schedules and campus resources. In the back row, the churchwoman dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her grey hair neat under her Sunday hat. She had insisted on coming, saying simply, "Someone should witness your beginning." The campus buzzed with spring energy as the niece moved into her dormitory. Students rushed past with boxes and bags while she carefully arranged her few possessions: donated bedding with tiny blue flowers, textbooks purchased through the emergency fund, and a new wool coat, practical navy blue, folded with care on top of the narrow bed. She touched the coat sleeve, remembering cold nights and the warmth of unexpected kindness. Summer brought golden light and long evenings at the Veterans Center. The niece sat at scratch tables, helping teenagers with college applications and SAT prep. "You're good at explaining things," one boy said, pencil tapping against his practice essay. She smiled and replied, "I remember what it's like to need help finding the words." When fall painted the leaves crimson and gold, she walked through Harvard Yard with steady purpose. Her backpack held psychology textbooks and carefully organized notes. Each week, she met with her academic mentor, reviewed her progress, and kept her therapy appointments, understanding that healing, like education, required patience and commitment. The CEO's scholarship program grew quietly but steadily. Named the Sarah Mitchell Emergency Education Fund, after his sister, it covered the gaps that could derail dreams: rush document fees, temporary housing vouchers, counseling co-pays, and emergency textbook costs. The churchwoman served on its advisory board, bringing practical wisdom earned through years of pantry work. Sometimes, she told donors, hope needs a bridge to walk across. The father's transformation came slowly, through small acts rather than grand gestures. He started his court-ordered service grudgingly, sorting cans at the pantry and mopping floors at the Veterans Center. But something shifted as weeks passed. He began arriving early, staying late, learning names and stories. His hands grew rough from work, his designer clothes replaced by practical jeans and worn sneakers. "Why do you keep coming?" a veteran asked him one day, after his required hours were complete. The father paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Because I'm learning what strength really looks like," he answered quietly. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after her mother's passing, the niece and CEO stood before a simple headstone. They laid down white roses and a letter sealed with care. The niece's handwriting flowed across the envelope. "Dear Mom, I made it. You made sure I could." The CEO squeezed her shoulder gently. "She knew you would. Did she know you'd help?" "She knew I'd try to be worthy of her trust once I understood what mattered." They stood together as maple leaves drifted down, red and gold against the blue sky. The niece thought about cycles, how seasons turn, how healing comes in layers, how love leaves maps for others to follow home. The next morning, dawn painted Harvard's brick buildings in soft rose light. The niece crossed the dewy grass, her shoes leaving temporary prints that would fade as the sun rose higher. Her phone buzzed with her uncle's text. "Proud of you." She smiled, touching the student ID card in her pocket. Her name, her photo, her rightful place restored. The morning air held that particular autumn crispness that makes every breath feel like possibility. She had learned that some things can't be stolen. Dignity, determination, the quiet certainty of belonging exactly where you are.